So anyone that wants a bit of a background on you guys, I'll put a little bit on the website just so we're not wasting time on the call, just to make it as seamless as possible. But one thing that I read last week was a tweet from a very experienced coach, I think, on VBT. And it went something like this. So I'm going to say I'm prepared to be roasted. But in my opinion, VBT is a great idea in principle, but a nightmare in practice. Athletes hate it. It stops the flow of the session. Too many variables to manipulate to make it worthwhile. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. So I'm going to kick off with that and come to you, Dan, someone that's been educating coaches for a long time and speaking to many people about VBT. Is this something that crops up a lot? Or is this an isolated case?
He's doing it wrong.
Okay.
Listen, people think VBT, and I really don't like the term VBT, but it's stuck there. So I just think velocity should influence decisions about good programming. The idea that you lift some light squats at 0.75 and you stop after 3 or 4 and you've lost 10-20% velocity decline is ridiculous. All my published studies, which have looked at long-term adaptations of 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, and up to 10 years in professional athletes. And we looked at what correlates to changes in velocity, lifting, for example, 50% 1 RM in a bench or in a jump squat. So in professional rugby players, and the biggest driver or correlate of the change in velocity is your change in 1 RM strength. So you've got to get stronger. If you're not getting stronger in your training, prepare yourself for a life of second or third division participation in sport. And if you're happy with that, good. Don't just go and lift 0.75 squats and play around with the girls there in the gym with pink dumbbells. But everyone else who strives to get stronger will improve their velocity lifting absolute resistances. Then on another day of the week, I believe you should have 2 days a week. One where you train strength, more oriented at strength and hypertrophy, and one where it's more velocity driven. On that velocity driven day, rather than looking at an iPad and you've lost 23%, stop the set, how about coach your effing athletes on the technique? And you can program quite simply. It goes like this. If you want a 20% velocity decline in squats or deadlifts, it's about half the amount of reps you possibly could do. So if you're doing a 10 RM, do 5 reps. You do an 8 RM, do 4 reps. That's 20% velocity decline. If you want a 10%, well, it's less. You're going to do maybe a third of the amount of reps. So doing 3 reps with a 10 RM, you'll only get a 10% velocity decline. You shouldn't use those percentages declines for the upper body. 20% velocity decline for squats and deadlifts is like 30% for bench and chin-ups and things like that. So use 30% for pressing movements and pull-ups, which is a minimal velocity decline, because normally if you go to failure, you're looking at maybe 60% velocity decline on bench press and pull-ups. So 30% is, again, about half the amount of reps. So I program those things in. I don't say, look at a screen, mate, and when it gets to 20%, just stop your set. I think that's stupid. I mean, that would drive me crazy.
So do you think that's what people think it's going to do, Dan? Just take over as the coach?
Well, I don't know what they think, but I certainly don't teach people that. They've never done that.
Yeah.
I mean, you might be doing a set. I might prescribe, say, 6 sets of 3, and we're doing something. But we get to the 4th set of 3, and if you're starting to get really big velocity declines, well, we have to make a decision. Do I give you a longer rest period, reduce the weight, or stop it there? That's just the art of coaching. And so you're using velocity to make an informed decision about what I do. Well, we've had a big velocity decline. Maybe you're really fatigued from team sport training, And the same thing with your strength work. This idea of estimating 1 RM from velocity scores, that's fool's gold. I prescribe a weight. Now, if there's a change in velocity lifting on almost any strength exercise of 0.04, 0.05, that's equivalent to a 2.5% change in 1 RM. So if someone's doing pull-ups, for example, and they're just using body weight and the body weight's constant, and they're normally getting 0.6 on the first 2 reps, now they're getting 0.65, we know they're going up 2.5%. If they're a swimmer or surfer, they might have had hard work in the water. They come in, they normally get 0.6 on their first set, and they're getting 0.55. Well, maybe the weight I choose from that day, if as we go up in weight, will be 2.5% less. That's how I say use velocity. Just use those scores to make better decisions about the program you're doing. It doesn't rule your world totally. It's something we use in combination with the weight on the bar and for heavy strength work, the RPE of the set, because it does correlate very strongly to the RPE of the last rep. So you use velocity and RPE at the end of the set, and you look at the velocity of your best rep to gauge where your strength level is that day. So if you normally squat 140 and your score for the first rep is 0.6 and one day you're 0.55, maybe you're about 2.5% down that day. Maybe the next few sets we can reduce the weight 2.5% or take one rep off that you're supposed to do. Because 2.5%, 1 arm is one rep, say. Mm-hmm. That's how I see it. So if people making it more complicated than that, they should give themselves an uppercut.
Okay. If you while someone else is talking, if you've got something to say, just unmute yourself. I know you've muted yourself, so thank you. Jono, seeing as though you've unmuted yourself, is that and not, this is not coming for Steve, who actually made that statement, by the way. Hopefully not. This is just setting the scene. And if my rationale for these kind of things, if he's saying it, that the old classroom, if someone's got the hand up asking a question, it's probably a question that everyone wants to ask. So is this a statement that you have heard before or similar?
Yeah, it's cheers, Robin. Thanks for having a chat, mate. It's pretty humbling to be the smallest guy on the panel for the first time in my life. Mate, if coach, I do hear it, and it's something that makes me kind of sit up and go, you don't understand VBT. You don't understand what VBT is, if that's what you're saying, because velocity-based training is just a method to enhance training practice, which utilizes velocity. It's velocity-based training. It's in the name. The hint's there. And I think, I know, we talk about things like continuums of velocity-based training, and velocity-based training entails a range of different methods. No one ever says to you, "Oh, do you utilize percentage-based training?" You'd be like, "What are you talking about?" Yeah, of course I do. But but everyone starts to say, "Oh, do you use velocity-based training?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And I think pinpointing what people are talking about and what they're struggling with, okay, sure. But the thing is if you can't, so on the most basic level, providing feedback of how an individual is training on a given day, you can provide motivation and improve competitiveness. And just providing feedback to your athletes is literally the most simple thing you can do. The most simple thing you can do. So it's like just interacting with your athletes a little bit, just a little bit. And if you want to improve your motivation and competitiveness, just provide some feedback. And if you're too busy for that, man. You're a busy guy. Or if you don't want to interact with your athletes, mate, there's a job at the local library waiting there for you. You know what I mean? Read a book all day. That's fine. But strength and conditioning is all about interacting and motivating and driving up competitiveness and helping to improve the environment in the gym. And at the most basic level, providing simple feedback is VBT, and then just as you go down and start incorporating maybe arbitrary cutoffs or arbitrary starting levels, or, all the way up to like kind of full auto-regulated periodized models with VBT, pick and choose. You're not like boxed into I'm a VBT guy and you're not a VBT guy, because realistically, you can pick and choose the tools that you want to use. And if they're struggling with VBT or some sort of aspect that they want to do, then maybe pick the cohort, pick the right tools from VBT and implement it with your squad there.
Lucky, coming to you. Is this,
mate,
what's your journey been like on this?
It's coming in as third place, mate. It's everyone's stolen all my ideas. It's said everything I was going to say, so there's not much to really repeat. But mate, I think it's spot on. I think it's the same as I think the analogy of I'm a percentage-based training guy is spot on. But it's our classic industry is just then I'm a kettlebell guy, I'm a this guy. Like these methods just get held onto. Velocity-based training, as Dan said, like the name just rolls off the tongue, so it's just been stuck with it now, and people are going to keep rolling with it. But it's just another measurement tool, another method that I can use in prescription. And the same as when we talk about people getting so caught up on iPads and everything. It's the same as if you're in an iPad and you're saying, well, the percentage I was planning for them to lift was going to be 70% today, and you look at them, forget about velocity. They're just lifting well, and they're fresh and they're flying and stuff like that. Like, that's where as a coach, you can be like, well, you know what, let's do a little bit more. Or the inverse. Like if I've prescribed 85%, 90%, and they look absolutely grindy and crap, well, I'm going to change that. And I think velocity-based training is exactly the same. It's a fantastic tool to utilize when your main key focus is going to be velocity. And you can also use it as a tool that can add to you as a coach to make better decisions, more decisions, or quicker decisions. But like everything, if you're going to be stuck on an iPad, or you're going to be having your head in the computer and worry more about that than watching your athlete lift, get rid of it. Like, I mean, if I've got young coaches, if I've got interns that are doing things outside of my gym, now a lot of them will obviously work under my guidance in our gym with a number of different tools. And they will naturally want to try and use those type of tools in their settings and in their scenarios. And some of their settings and scenarios that they need to be on the floor, they need to be coaching. They can't be watching things or monitoring things as detailed as they probably would want to, if it's based around computers or iPads or anything like that. And sometimes it's just about recording and worrying about it later, looking at it later, reviewing these things later. We use Team Builder at Athletes Authority, and they have the option to be able to plug in your meters a second for each of them. So you can have some pretty basic VBT stuff and have it recorded in there and review it later and stuff like that. It's always great done live, obviously, but mate, I'm completely with the other two. At the end of the day, it is a great tool. It's a great measure and method that you can utilize and add to your training. But there's not once would I ever think of velocity-based training as everything that I'm going to do in the gym and everything's going to be based on VBT.
So, John, I'll come back to you. The science has been stacking up for a while that this is potentially the way to go. Why would people not? What are the barriers for people not to implement this?
Yeah, and I think there's a good question, mate. And just like anything, you got barriers. Like wanting to get stronger, you got barriers. You need access to a gym. If you want to go down to a gym, you need barbells, you need plates, and all these sort of things cost weight. But velocity-based training has this, does have technology involved, and that is a aspect that you need to consider. And I know as it starts to get a bit geeky here, but validity and reliability is essential for this technology. And there are some pieces of technology which are excellent, and then some technology are maybe riding the wave a little bit. But I think that the first and foremost, you kind of need the technology and you need to understand it a little bit. The second thing is that at universities and clubs and schools and everywhere we learn resistance training, we're not taught about bars go heavier, bars go slower. You know what I mean? Like, we're not taught about that. Because I think if when I was undergrad, if I'd been taught bars go heavier, bars go slower, instead of percentages, which we know don't account for daily fluctuations in fatigue, because we get tested in fatigue-free states, and then for the rest of the mesocycle, we often prescribe off it. People would just be going, "What the hell are you talking about? That's insane." You know what I mean? I think realistically, it's probably understanding the information around VBT and what it is and how it ties in with percentages. And then probably the final thing is just kind of then also explaining it to the athletes. Just like any training program you've got, you need to explain what you're trying to go for. We know for a fact that adaptations are greater when the athlete believes in the coach and believes in the program and really buys into it. And I think if you can just explain bars go heavier, bars go slower, as you fatigue, bars go slower, then realistically the athlete starts to buy into it too. So pretty much there's a few things there, but I think just understanding what VBT is probably the biggest barrier. And because we're often taught one way, it doesn't mean that this other way isn't valuable. It's just we need to be taught about it and we need to learn about it.
Dan, biggest barriers for the guys that you've come across and educated along the way, what are the biggest barriers for those guys to implement it?
I think just, older strength coaches struggle with technology in the gym. Where, I've had guys who are, say, college coaches in America, experienced guys who say, but, I'm really good at what I do. I've done this, for 20 years at this college. I don't want to change. And so no one says you have to change your programming. You're just getting a tool to probably validate your really good observations that this athlete's flat today or this athlete's flying, like Lachlan said. So it doesn't need to change anything you do if you don't want it to. It just helps you make better decisions. And then from my experiences, better coaches or good coaches just use velocity to validate what they see and give objective data. So, okay, you're a bit fatigued today. Well, what's that? What's a bit? How much do I drop the weight back in the bar? Okay, well, your score's down 0.07 on normally. So let's drop that back 3 or 4%. That's all. You know. So we just, rather than saying a bit, what's a bit? Is it 10 kilos, 5 kilos? So when it just gives you an objective number. If we know that, a 0.05 change in most strength exercise equals 2.5%, we can give proper objective amounts to, I'm a bit stronger today, I'm a bit more fatigued today. And good coaches should be aware of that. They'll see it with their eye, like Lachlan said. Okay, but now we've got a concrete amount of data to make a slightly better decision.
Go on, mate.
On that as well, I find it as a fantastic avenue, as just another way of prescription, especially for some of my, say, track athletes or combative athletes that do associate speed of movement quite a lot with what they do, and being able to prescribe a specific velocity irrespective of the weight they use. So on a fatigue day, they'll lift lighter but hit the same speed. On a day they're feeling good, they'll load up and still hit the same speed. I think from a mental standpoint, I find it far better for the athlete when they can focus on that. And I have far less of this, I'm feeling tired, so then I go, well, let's drop the weight a little bit and change this. But I lifted that last week. I should be able to lift it this week. When it's the velocity focus, they seem to be far less concerned with what's actually on the bar. In certain movements, obviously, we do trap bar jumps and squat jumps predominantly with this type of method. But it's a fantastic option for them because it actually takes that mental focus off the weight and keeps it on velocity-based training, exactly what we're trying to improve at the time: speed, power, and moving that bar with speed. And whether they're fatigued or not, it's just a fantastic avenue for them to focus on.
There's been a couple of questions, but we'll use probably the last 10, 15 minutes to come to all questions. So people keep firing them in there and we'll get them to the end, get them at the end. Just staying with you, Lockie, metrics. It sounds like there's potentially people get overwhelmed with what they should be doing, how they should be doing it, what says in the research, what I can actually do in practice, that potential disconnect. In terms of the metrics that we should be using from your experience, team sports, private setting, where have you gone with that? How deep have you gone with the metrics that you collect and use?
Look, we've done a bit of both. So if you look at the pro sports side, we've certainly looked at the idea of having certain lifts that players will come in and we'll monitor those lifts within the warm-up and the prep, and then obviously that will then guide their session. We found that just a little bit cumbersome in the way, and this was, again, way that we set up. We only had one unit at the time. People were flowing through. We were, boys were tired. They were coming off the deck. So these are the type of things that obviously with more units, better setup can function better. In the situation we had, it didn't work very well. So we then became far more specific with the lifts that we used it on. And again, we would usually use it in our velocity blocks, which is the start of our session, or on, as Dan was saying, on days that we were doing velocity style days versus a max effort style day. At Athletes Authority, we're a little bit different. We have a couple of the wireless gym aware units, which are the flex units. They've been really handy. We certainly don't prescribe them to everyone all the time. A lot of the athletes that we work with, we do have a much more percentage-based focus, and the style of training they do is far probably more probably more general in the fact that I don't get to live with them day in, day out like I did in the professional world, where we could make fine tweaks here and there. These athletes are obviously coming in. Most of them are amateur athletes. Most of them are trying to make it to the next level, or they're kids. So doing that becomes very hard to be really specific with a lot of things. So with our prescription with velocity-based training at the current private setting is predominantly that other metric for prescription, which is where I will most commonly prescribe a velocity that I want them to hit based on where I want them to actually be within that mesocycle, that periodization model that we're working with, obviously the style of athlete and the speeds I want them to get to. And then we'll start to program off that using slightly faster velocities, slightly slower velocities, and innately that weight will shift based on the velocity that we prescribe. We don't do a lot of box squatting where it'll be max effort style movements, but we're measuring that smaller fatigue with our velocity-based training tools. But I have done that in the past, but it's certainly not something that I do in the private sector.
Just coming to you, Dan, different populations, would you focus on different things based on experience level? I know that's come up in a question. We can get to that specifically at the end, but experience level, age, etc.
Yeah, I don't use any velocity-based training much with young athletes. They don't need it. Just get in and get strong. And because normally for younger athletes, you got larger numbers because they're academy, and so they're not as important. So there'll be a bigger squad and less resources. So it becomes like Lachlan and Jono said, it becomes difficult to manage. Unless, maybe one exercise like jump squats or something where you need a velocity score or trap bar jumps or something like that. But as athletes get more advanced, I use it on key exercises. So I'm not measuring Nordics with it or glute ham raises or curls. I normally only measure 2 or 3 exercises in a workout. Because it's normally only for me 2 or 3 key exercises in a workout, and the rest is the other stuff. But if you've got enough people, you can measure it in 5 or 6. You've got 5 or 6 important exercises. Use it on 5 or 6. So if you had squat, push, press, bench press, and cleans, you can do it on all of them. So it's up to you. But I use it less with young people. They don't need it. They just need to get in and train, be consistent, get stronger, start learning the RPE method, which is easy to teach them. And then later on, the RPE method and the velocity system, they mesh together. They work well together in the strength world. So if they're already familiar with the RPE system, then we can add the velocity measurements later on, and they'll mesh well together.
Jono, could we just come into you?
Definitely.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm just going to say down that left-hand side of the continuum, for just motivational purposes, can that be good for young athletes just to get them on the continuum?
Yeah, that seminal work, which was kind of like the real first piece of work, which Argus did back in like 2010, 2011. Around that time, he kind of did feedback and showed that, okay, velocity and power outputs increase. And that was in Super Rugby. But the real seminal work that showed why these increases started to occur was actually in adolescence. So, it works. It works in adolescence, but that's not me saying that we need to use it with adolescents.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an individual who needs to learn how to squat, the last thing we need to do is then putting an external focus on them and saying, okay, let's chase these numbers. Like, no one's saying that. That's insane. But realistically, you can use it across all age groups. With guys like Sam Orange have done work with elderly populations. Gabriel Ciano uses work has been talking about things like sit to stands and things like that, monitoring velocity. So all right up to the octogenarians and elderly individuals down to adolescents, it has been shown to work. But realistically, when do we start seeing the real bang for our bucks? Probably in that elite athlete population. For me personally, I found the best time I've ever had it was when I've had squads of about 45 to 50 athletes. They've come off a field, we've planned to do 5 kilometers. The coach has said has just gone over time by about 45 minutes. They've run additional 5 kilometers. They've taken 20 hits. They've cleared out 5 rucks or 6 rucks on average per athlete. And then they come in all banged up. And those, 70% 1RM back squats that we had prescribed are no longer 70% 1RM back squats. They're more like 85, 90%, and instead of tearing my hair out and start screaming about why you guys are, so useless and you can't do these reps just because I stayed up to 3 a.m. trying to program them, hey, let's take a step back and go, okay, well, the velocity is lower. Okay, they're finding it harder. Let's take some load off and let's actually prescribe what we prescribed. So realistically, VBT is just a tool that allows us to prescribe more objectively and to account for fatigue as the athletes are training. So realistically, you can utilize the whole spectrum. But for me personally, mate, those big squads where I need to start to account for all the different forms of fatigue occurring across the week or across the mesocycles, that's when I really started to see those big bang for bucks. Actually, and also when you got one-on-one athlete and you can go full auto-regulatory periodization, geez, that's pretty exciting stuff too.
It's potentially them big groups, Jono, that people would say is the barrier. So logistically, how was that working with your group of 45, 50? What did that look like?
Yeah, so personally, when we had the boys come in and you got 45 lads come in and, you know, they've been on the field first, because this is the thing about VBT and percentage-based training. VBT is based off percentage-based training. You can't say VBT doesn't work because percentage-based training doesn't work in theory, you know. But realistically, for me, you know, we know that the load velocity relationship is very linear. We know that the bar gets heavier, the bar goes slower, and we can. And as the boys walk in, you kind of have these arbitrary cutoffs going down to that left-hand side of the continuum. And as the boys come in, and you know that the bar should be going somewhere between 0.6 and 0.7 meters per second or something. And then as you've got your iPad in front of you and you're talking to the boys, for me, I'm very sure I have to go stand on the box, so I have to go see everyone. So, but I can shout out to the lads, you know, I can see the velocity in front of me. I can see the velocity on my iPad. I can go have conversations and actually have stimulate some discussion about why the bar is going slower, why they're feeling it harder today. I don't need to intervene with everyone. They've still got their programs based off percentages. They've still got the programs, and the weights that they're going to lift with. But if the bars are going about 0.2 of a meter per second slower, hey, then we can have some objective feedback. We can give it back to the athlete and we can go, hey lads, all right, the bar's going slow, what's going on today? And you can have those conversations. For me, it's not something that I need to intervene with on every single rep and every single set. I can just set up the gym wares. Well, I personally, I've always used gym wear and they've been really effective for me. I can set them up. As the boys come in, away we go. The boys know that the speed should be between 0.6 and 0.7. First rep should be somewhere in that. If not, then hey, maybe we need to modify the load. And that's personally super easy. If a coach can't get their head around or doesn't have the time to do something like that, geez, maybe they're too busy and then maybe they need to get a hand or take a step back, you know.
Were you going to dive in there a minute ago, Lockie?
Yeah, I was actually, I've now completely forgotten what I was going to say. But that was what I was going to say. Perfect. Thank you. I was just going to confirm the fact that I think one of those big, I suppose, hurdles to velocity-based training is when the focus shifts from the technical execution of it. And you do see that, you know, Dan mentioned with kids, they don't need it, which is spot on. When you get kids just focusing on trying to move things quickly, it's always a recipe for disaster. And same goes for sometimes when you're in sport, obviously you might have a 22-year-old, but he's still a kid. And the way they act and the way they get competitive is also a positive, but can be a negative. So I think it's really important to understand your group, the people you're working with, especially like I've seen plenty of coaches that use VBT with Olympic lifting and they can't even Olympic lift. So there's no point chasing these velocities when they can't actually Olympic lift. So I think really understanding your group and the person or people you're working with and how their shift of attention to velocity is going to affect their training, positive or negative, I think you've just really got to take into that consideration.
Just stay on that, Lucky. What kind of group would you or have you in the past seen it bomb with? And what kind of population have you seen it fly with? What kind of characteristics of a group?
I think, look, the characteristic of a group that it works well with is one that's been educated about it, two has a good training age. The same principle of, you know, people trying to use advanced plyometric training and they're not even strong. There's no freaking point. Like, I think when you're starting to focus on velocity, though, I think you have to have some sound foundational movement patterns to be able to actually lift well. So, you know, groups that are educated well on it, know what they're chasing. They're not just always chasing the fastest velocity possible, regardless of movement. They understand how it's going to affect them and they understand the outcomes they're looking for, is key. I think the group that doesn't work well with it are ones that don't necessarily value strength training to begin with. I've seen certainly people that don't value strength training as much, and then using VBT, trying to get them on board with the speed side of things rather than worrying about how much load's on the bar. It's been very hit and miss previously. Sometimes you can have good success. People always hang shit on soccer players for it, so I'll keep doing it. But you look at some soccer players that don't necessarily are known for not enjoying lifting heavy. I think VBT can potentially work well where they can have something else to focus on. But then also, if they just don't value strength training, then that ends up being a bit of a backward step, because then they start getting a little bit out of control with it as well. So, I hope that answers the question. But for me, it's a mature group that's been educated versus a group that just doesn't take strength and conditioning to the seriousness that they have, or a young group that gets distracted easily.
Similar for you, Dan, in terms of groups that it works with and groups that it doesn't?
Yeah. I mean, when I first started using velocity training was with the Australian diving team in the early 1990s, so from 1993 onwards. That's how old it is. It's so new, velocity-based training. And with a springboard or platform diver, the main thing is, the velocity they come off the board or the platform with, because that determines jump height, which then determines the distance before you hit the water. So, when you got divers, you have females in a diving squad, probably sometimes 13 or 14. So that's young athletes. And it worked for them because all they want to do is jump higher in the air. That's the whole reason they go to the gym. And you remember in the 1990s, no one looked at weight, especially females. It's not like now. I might look like Arnold Schwarzenegger or something, will I? I'm pretty sure he won't love, but, So it will work, individual sport athletes, track and field, divers, where, like guys I mentioned before, where velocity is the focus of their sport, they'll really embrace it. A lot of them, especially track and field and diving and things like that. But like John was saying, and like you're saying, just a competition. So if you've got any athlete who's competitive, it's a jump contest. Okay, whoever gets the win, but most weight. So as long as the athlete's competitive, it will work. But it can work with young athletes, especially individual sport athletes and track and field athletes, because velocity is their focus for every track and field event. Whether you throw, jump, or sprint, and diving is a jumping sport. So any of those sports.
John, coming back to you. Velocity loss, and I think there's a question here that we'll, like I said before, we'll come back to specifically in the last 10-15 minutes, but seems to be getting a lot of attention. Can you give us a bit of a rundown on what velocity loss is? And then I know Dan's mentioned it right at the start, but just to kind of take us back and just give us an idea of what it is, then we'll have a little dive into how people might implement it.
Yeah, so velocity loss, so like if anyone's listening and isn't across it, I'll make this like eggs for a second here and I'll start the bare bones. But velocity loss is one of those concepts where pretty much you have a starting velocity and then you exercise down to a relative percentage of that velocity. So for example, if you start at 0.7, a 10% loss would be 0.63, 20% 0.56, 30% 0.49, and you go down. And what we're seeing is, and the literature is very conclusive on this, is that when you prescribe a velocity loss threshold, the external response, I'm going to start with the external response because the external drives the internal, which drives the adaptation, and that's what we're interested in, right? The external response is very, very consistent across sets. So if I start with a certain velocity loss threshold, start at 0.7, let's say, go down to 0.63, well, the external, the force, the velocity, and the power maintains within this kind of very tight boundary. That's irrespective of the athlete because you're helping to control the external response. Now, that's all well and good, but what really interests me personally is where the internal responses start to kick in. And I think you tweeted a paper there, and I genuinely meant it was one of the most important papers I've ever been involved with. And I don't know if I'll ever be involved with a paper more important personally, mate. But what that paper demonstrated is that with velocity loss thresholds, is that they're highly reproducible. So as a coach, I don't care if an athlete can do something once. I care if I can prescribe a training session and they can do it multiple times, time and time again. So if I prescribe 3 times 10 with 75% of your 1RM at the start of the season, your internal response at the start of the season is going to be very, very different once you've had 8 weeks of training. But the thing is that does that mean that we're prescribing a session and unable to reproduce it, with traditional percentage-based methods? Well, yeah. Have you ever done 3 times 10 at 75% and then done it multiple times? Well, the third, fourth, fifth time you feel better than the first time. The first time you're hanging out your backside. But with velocity loss thresholds, what that enables you to do is allows you to have an external stimulus that drives an internal stimulus that is highly reproducible. And what we've done to demonstrate that is we've got people to do 10, 20, 30% velocity loss thresholds. We've got them to go away. We've got them to go away, do as much training as they want. They can do as little training as they want. They can go train the house down. They can do moderate amounts of training. They can do strength training, hypertrophy training, just power training. It doesn't matter. And this is what we need to do more in resistance training research to begin with. We need to assess the reproducibility of our training prescriptive methods. Because I don't care if you can do something once, I need to be able to do it time and time again. So once these athletes started to come back, some of them were 4 weeks, some of them were 2 months, some of them were 3 months, all the way up to 6 months. We got them to come back in, and we prescribed the same velocity at the same velocity loss thresholds, and the internal response, the neuromuscular, the metabolic, the perceptual, all the fatigue responses were the same, like within 1 or 2%. Amazing control. So what that means to me as a coach, it means I can now prescribe something and it's reproducible over time. Because let's be honest, you prescribe 4 times 5 at 80% of 1RM today, and in 3 weeks' time you come back, you're going to have a very, very different response, but not with velocity loss thresholds and not with VBT. And that's why, personally, as a coach, it's just so darn powerful.
Mm-hmm. Lucky velocity loss in your setting, pro sport, private?
Yeah, we didn't use it to that extent in the pro setting. We, as I said, at that stage we were, we had 1 gym aware unit at the time. It certainly wasn't with our age. Look, the group that we had a lot of 18-year-olds come straight in. It was an AFL setting initially. When I was in rugby league, velocity-based training would have blown their brains a little bit. But it certainly was the initial start of it when we had a young group. And that type of, the concept of it and the research that John was talking about is certainly a game breaker for prescriptive based stuff and being able to be quite accurate in the way that you can prescribe. And I think that's always been people's arguments with percentage based training, that it is that traditional, let's test the 1RM and then we're going to use that 1RM, some people for the next 8 weeks. And it just simply isn't going to be valid. And we certainly, at Athletes Authority, we use percentage-based training. We do it on technically a 4-week cycle. And a lot of it's based on training percentages rather than actual testing percentages. Again, it's just the environment I'm in. It's certainly not something that we have used in the private setting, but it is certainly something with a couple more units. I don't see why it wouldn't be valid and really effective in my environment, considering how different everyone's days and weeks are. We have almost 200 athletes with, I'm going to make a pun, probably about 30 different sports. So with that many different sports, every training cycle is different. Every day is different. Some are full-time athletes going for professional contract. Others are amateur athletes that have got to work as well. So to be able to prescribe knowing what the hell they do every day is very hard. So I think something like a threshold loss option is certainly something we could look at implementing. I certainly haven't done it, but no.
Cool. I think we've got some decent questions coming in. So I don't know if you've seen these on the Q&A, but Dan, I'm going to come to you for that last one. So Olympic weightlifting exercises exist on a spectrum. Have any of you seen value in selecting a specific weightlifting exercise to achieve a specific velocity range that corresponds to a specific adaptation?
Choosing the exercise, why don't you choose the velocity then? Well, I'll give you an example, like Chinese high jumpers. This was told me by Joseph Coyne. I didn't train these guys for the Rio Olympics. They were doing hand cleans and sets of 2, getting a peak velocity of 2 meters per second. Then as they got close to the Olympics, they thought that was too slow. They moved to 2.2. how much weight do they use, or what's the most amount of weight you can use today and get that velocity. And then when do we stop? When both reps in the set didn't achieve that velocity. So you might have been 12 sets of 2 on one day, 15 sets of 2 on another, 6 sets of 2 on another. What weight? Well, whatever is the most weight, you can still get that. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's one way of looking at it. But you have to be careful that there's certain things you can do in weightlifting that can give you a false peak velocity. You can smash that bar against your hips where it drifts way out, and you get a great peak velocity, but it's shit technique. And measuring velocity during Olympic lifts lasted 2 sets at the Broncos. One guy worked it out.
Figure it out quickly.
Yeah. So we had, that was a tendodyne then. So you only had average velocity, but he worked it out. If he did really bad technique and looped that tether around a long way with a reverse curl technique, he got a higher velocity. So 2 sets, it was gone because it was changing behavior. Velocity does change behavior. Sometimes people want to win the contest so bad, they'll choose an inappropriate technique behavior. No matter what you can argue and say, don't do it. These are, battle dogs. These are forwards in rugby league. They would crush the skull of an opponent and scoop out their brain as easy as anything in life. So saying, oh, come on, have good technique not to win the contest and don't win the contest, it's not going to happen. So you have to be careful. But if you have really good trainers, you can use peak velocity and on any Olympic lift. And, obviously the snatch is faster because the snatch uses 20% less weight. Snatches are 20% faster than cleans because you snatch 20% less. So whether you use a snatch pull or a clean pull or jump or whatever, it just comes down to what load you want to do and your technique and your mobility. I don't think, people think, snatch is inherently faster. Well, snatch is faster because it's 22% less weight in a snatch. So it's 22% faster.
That brings it to a nice, I think it might be interesting, bar path. When it comes to tech and something that measures bar path, is that something that we should be worried about and choosing tech that does, or are we not too fussed depending who it is and team sport environment, etc.? I know there's been quite a lot written recently about the importance of bar path. Does it really matter? Are we going that in depth with our team sport athletes?
Sorry, you go, John.
Oh no, mate. I was just going to say personally, mate. It's like before VBT, before I can implement guys using velocity to prescribe their training or help modify their training, I trust that I'm a good enough coach to make sure their technique is good enough. You know what I mean? I'm not going to chase these arbitrary numbers or, get them to do anything that is, ridiculous unless the athletes that I'm working with have the technique to be able to do it. And if the boys in the squad are, chasing these numbers, hey, you have an explanation, you have a chat with them, you say, okay, this is why we're doing it. And this is why, and this is what I'm going to ask from you. And you use that relationship and that coaching experience to really hammer that technique element. Now that then comes into things like bar path. I trust that I'm a good enough coach to be able to teach a squat or a bench press or a snatch or a clean or whatever exercise it is. And, you can't, it's really, bar path is just another form of augmented feedback, isn't it? It's really valuable. But I'm also a coach at heart too. I'm never going to be trying to sacrifice, barbell velocity, technique for barbell speed and things like that. So for me personally, mate, it's about keeping the coaching in coach, you know what I mean, or the coaching. So I think there's a really important thing to acknowledge there. And not all forms of EBT are necessary all the time. So I think that's important. Things like flex, things like GymAware, and GymAware I think are the only ones with like the horizontal displacement measures. They're really good for monitoring bar path. I've had really good results with monitoring, with providing feedback to my Olympic lifting athletes. And because they like knowing where the bar path is going. Rugby union, rugby league, AFL boys, they don't care. They just want to lift some heavy weights, you know what I mean? But for those technicians, for the sprinters, for the endurance runners, for the Olympic athletes, they love seeing that bar path. And if that's something they value and they get something out of and it helps them improve their technique, maybe even a slight way, great. I'm not going to sacrifice anything at the expense of being a good coach as well,
Lucky, I think dive in there.
I was just going to say, I personally wouldn't waste time on getting an app or something real specific for bar path. If it's great, as Jono said, it's a feedback tool. Now, if I'm teaching someone Olympic lift, I'll coach, I'll give cues, I'll give movements, I'll give feel. And then if they still not getting it, then I'll film them, I show them, and then they can see the bar path move. Like if it helps, it helps. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's not something that I would put all of my team sport athletes through a bar path screen to see what sort of movements they have and give them all a percentage off the midline and this type of stuff and rank them. And for me, it's a great feedback tool for someone that needs it. In Jono's example, well, if he's working with Olympic weightlifters, that's their game footage. It's the same as when a footy player watches their training sessions or their field sessions. They pay attention to that. If you're an Olympic weightlifter, well, you're going to pay attention to the film of you doing Olympic weightlifting. Probably not as important for a team sport athlete, providing the coaching them and cueing them and showing them video footage just with an iPhone on or a Samsung, whatever you got, on the gym floor, and showing them the video. It's that's the best thing about the smartphones these days. I'll use it all the time just to film, quickly show, slow down. They see it. It clicks with them. I now know what he's saying. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just diving into one of the questions from John around peak power watts as a means of collecting extra data. Is that useful? Feel free to dive in. I won't put it on someone's plate. Is that something that we should be worried about? These kind of extra metrics?
The problem with watts and power now, there are so many different calculations that we can't just compare between devices. There's every researcher has a fight, these biomechanics about how power should be calculated. So whilst all my published papers, like from 20 years ago, we had power, we use a simple formula of mass times by 9.81 times by the velocity. Now you can't use that, or if some people don't use that, they use their other things, and I don't know. So the safest now just to measure velocity. And then if you want to work out your own power, you can use that old school formula. Because, for example, I'll give you an example. We used to always have power and when I was at the Broncos, because we had different jump squats, we're trying to work out. And then all of a sudden in 2010, and the scores did not correlate with the previous 14 years of data I'd collected, even the last week. So I stay away from power now because every device uses different algorithms. I just stay with either average velocity across the entire range or peak velocity. Power is unfortunately flawed now.
I think there too, Rob. Like personally, there's only one instance when I'd provide power back to athletes. It's just to motivate them. Athletes like the concept of power. They go, "Oh, power, great! This is phenomenal." But realistically, we know because force times velocity equals power, and if you've got a heavier bar, if you're lifting it, so the person who's lifting the heavier bar at the same relative speed, so let's say two people lifting at 0.4 meters per second, and one person's got a heavier bar, well, guess what? That person is more powerful. So realistically, the only reason we use velocity is because there's a near perfect relationship between barbell velocity and intensity, which we can help use to prescribe. We know that as individuals fatigue, bars go slower. So as fatigue accumulates, we get tired. And that there's a relationship with the terminal velocity, which is often known as the 1RM velocity. So by monitoring power, realistically, you're kind of just looking at the mass on the bar. You know what I mean? Like, from a real basic kind of, I'm not a biomechanist, but, force times velocity, if the velocity between your squads are pretty similar, let's say you're all training at 0.5, well, the strongest guy is going to have the highest power. So personally, and I've had this discussion before, but, you just stick with velocity, you know what I mean? It's so easy, and the power can be used as a tool that helps motivate them. Oh, I'm really powerful today. But realistically, at the end of the day, the tools that we need, it's right there in front of us in VBT.
John,
I've got a very boring answer. I only use velocity.
Yeah, cool. John, I'll come back to you. Is there a reduction in validity with decreases in skill of movement? I know we've potentially touched on this already, but explicitly.
Yeah, personally, if I trust that I'm a good enough coach to be able to coach a squat, a bench press, a clean, a pull, all those sorts of exercises. And if they're not skillful enough to perform the movements, VBT probably isn't the tool for them. Probably they need to go do more bodyweight squats, but goblet squats and Bulgarian split squats, and just get used to the proprioception of their body. They just need to know where their limbs are in space, probably. So personally, if you're starting to kind of wobble around with the bar and things are going like this and all that sort of stuff, well, yeah, the velocity is going to be, skewed for sure. But realistically, do they need the velocity? You know what I mean? Because I trust that my athletes, the low velocity relationship is linear, but if they're wobbling around and kind of doing the wonky knee dance, I'd probably start to go, oh, geez, maybe they don't need VBT right now. Maybe they need a coach.
Dan, just coming back to what you said at the start about the name VBT, velocity-based training, what would be the alternative to help everyone? Have you got a good one? Trademark it.
Power-based training.
Yeah, just power training. We use it for strength training as well. So do we call percentage-based stuff, I'm doing percent-based training? Do we call it RPE-based training, strength training? It's a tool we use to make a selection and choices. So I would say, I'll use velocity here to, in today's jump squat thing, we've got 6 sets of 3. We're going to use the highest amount of weight. We're going to start with X weight. And if you get over this velocity score, you can add more weight until you get to this threshold. You can't go below this score, but keep putting on more weight if you get above this score. So it's a tool for certain exercises, but in other exercises, if I'm squatting heavy, I'm squatting heavy. And the velocity scores will be, they'll roll out what they roll out at. So if I'm going to RPE 9.5 on my squats tomorrow, I know what my last rep's going to be. I can tell you right now, it's somewhere between 0.25 and 0.29. I can tell you that right now. So it don't matter shit to me at any velocity loss, because it depends what the first rep is. The first rep will be around 0.4. It'll be 175K. So, I'm not saying we're doing velocity-based training. I'm using velocity when I do my squats tomorrow. And I'll also do it when I'm doing some light stuff, but it's just a tool. So
I think it might even be semantics, but you're spot on that when people think of it as a training methodology rather than a tool to assist with their training. And I personally, I don't believe it's a training methodology. It's not it's not a style of training or a construct of programming it is a tool that measures whatever training you're doing or however you're programming it, or however you're setting it up. The same as the weight on the bar is a measurement of what you're lifting. I think people will probably get caught up as you're either doing VBT or you're not. It's an addition to whatever programming you're currently doing, in my opinion.
Not to sound like a broken record. Yeah. Oh, sorry, no, go on, Dan. It'll be more interesting than what.
Olympic weightlifting is velocity-based training. If you don't get a certain velocity, the bar doesn't land on your shoulders. So all Olympic weightlifting is velocity-based training. If you don't clean at a peak of at least 1.5, the bar will not end on your collarbone. So.
Yeah, I think probably not to sound like a broken record. It's a tool. Percentage-based training and velocity-based training go hand in hand. And when people go, "Oh, VBT is a myth and VBT doesn't work," and I once had a reviewer once come back to me saying, "Oh, Jonathan Weakley's work is totally unjustified and it doesn't make sense." I was like, mate, as long as barbells go slower and barbells get heavier and things like that, well, I can know. You know what I mean? I kind of don't know how to respond to that. So it's a tool. I'd probably change it to VBT or velocity-based tools. So the thing is that I think realistically, we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. VBT is a tool that uses all the information. Zatsiorsky and Matt Viev, mate, they'll be high-fiving and spinning in their graves right now because we're not against it. It's not like Lockie, Dan, me, Jay-Z, Joe Biden are sitting around in the VBT Illuminati. You know what I mean? It's just using this tool that we've got to help inform and help to account for the fatigue as we're going. So realistically, all those block periodized models, linear periodization, or whatever people want to call that. I'm not going to go into that debate right now. Undulating programming and all that sort of stuff. We can still use everything that we know. We can still use those percentages, but we just know that there's a corresponding speed that helps us to account for the fatigue better and be more objective every single day.
Lucky, coming back to you, and I think you've gone through this process relatively recently, and I probably left this to last to just get it in and then bail. Choosing good VBT equipment. What was the process that you went through to choose the tool that you decided on in the end?
A very simple process is trusting very smart people and a lot smarter than me. I'm certainly not a researcher. I'm not someone that can pull the VBT tools apart and look at the reliability and the validity of it. I've used push bands. I've used GymAware, the original GymAwares, plus the Flex systems. My selection was based around ease of use, what my athletes could also use easily, and also things that gave me reliable feedback. So we've landed at the moment. This could change, but we've used GymAware, that changed. We used Push, that changed. We're now on GymAware Flex, and it's the wireless system's easy for us to put in a busy gym, not getting caught up on things, not getting attached to things. It's easy feedback, very simple feedback on an iPad for our athletes. Big numbers, big buttons, big kilogram measurements that they can punch in very easily, and they understand it. And it's a pretty boring answer, but that's exactly how I base it on. From that, there's then obviously, as I said, the tier of talking to others that have used products and have actually looked at more of the reliability and validity research. And again, I trust my peers rather than delving deep down into that. But also when I'm coaching, I want to make sure that when I'm getting numbers back, that it's making sense, that it's counting the reps correctly. It's giving me the velocity that I would think would be roughly around. Obviously it's always going to be eyeballing, but I've even early days with GymAware when you'd be doing an Olympic lift, and exactly what Dan said. So they make a big hip contact and you get this spike and you're like, that is not correct. Like, that did not make any sense. And when you obviously watch them, you can see where it's coming from. But yeah, I think the two levels are what's easy and applicable in my environment, but also trusting people smarter than me around validity and reliability of it.
Jono, anything to add?
Yeah. I think, like for me, like I just don't like being lied to. You know what I mean? I think that's a life thing, and I think that's I think that's across everything that I do. And the technology that I use, I'm very, very, I trust that the information that's coming into me is reliable and is valid. And those, I know it's scientific principles. We're not going to go down the scientific rabbit hole, but these concepts are absolutely essential to technology in particular. And, I'm not going to shamelessly plug myself here too much, but the thing is we wrote a big systematic review on it. It's in SportsMed. It will come out hopefully in the next it's already accepted. It's been accepted for a month or two. It's got everything summed up, every single device on the market in the last, forever. It's forever now. So every device you can think of has been summed up in this paper. And there's a pretty clear winner, and that's probably just due to the validity and reliability. But for me, I trust these devices to provide me good, accurate feedback, and that feedback is essential to helping me make objective decisions with my athletes. So, personally, like if people want to reach out and have a chat about it, for sure, but I think having good, valid, reliable tools is absolutely essential.
Last but not least.
I've used, since I've been around the 90s, we used plyometric power system, then we used timing mats, then we used Tenderdyne, then GymAware, early version of Assess to Perform, and then Push. So I currently use Push because it's cost effective for most trainers. Now, when people say, it's not valid, with the latest paper by Liam Hughes compared Push and GymAware, they're found to be very similar, but the same. What people don't realize is the difference sometimes is in rep detection, when that rep starts and ends. Now, if you've got a Alico Olympic bar and someone's doing a heavy squat, and I publish this in Instagram, one of my guys at workshop, squatting 187, the bar comes up, whips past the original position, it's a forceful lockout, whips up, then comes back down. Where's the end of that rep? Is it when it goes past the original start position, when it comes back down, when it settles after a few oscillations? When is the exact end of that rep? And none of the researchers, no paper has ever said, has accounted for that when they look at these validities. I know when ECU does a paper, they all use, because I'm from ECU, Alico weightlifting bars. So I know that. So I know that when they've got a heavy squat and the guys are squatting 150, 160, they've got these whipping motions and these Alico bars. So when someone's doing validity on these devices, they should say which barbell they're using. They should, but I've never seen that in another paper except from ECU ones where they say we're using Alico ones. Because when they're trying to compare bars, you know, all these devices should be compared on different barbells. So you could say, I'm going to use a GymAware on a Alico powerlifting bar, which is very stiff, versus an Alico weightlifting bar and do a squat and see if we get the same measurement. And then, you know, again, as we all know, the bar placement on the bar of the device affects them as well. So I would say to people, just be aware that, you know, you can, like GymAware has got the longest time of collecting data since, say, 2006. They've been around the longest. But other devices are coming on the market that are a different price point. I mean, let's face it, well, how much is GymAware? $2,500?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, £600. Yeah.
Yeah, the linear transducer is 2,600, and then the Flex is 600.
600 US or Oz?
Australian, or 660 something. Yeah.
Yeah. So they've had to come down to a market because you get these other devices, the accelerometers are, you know, 300, 400, something like that. So they've had to go from the Rolls-Royce market and come down with Flex. So a lot of these devices are fairly good. So if you're doing research, like John was saying, you probably want to go like with a GymAware because it gives you a rabbit hole of so much other things you can look at. And I've got research with a lot of my research with GymAware. If you're just a trainer and when I say just a trainer, be a strength conditioning coach and that, and price point is an issue, you'll go with one of the cheaper accelerometers, which is shown to be valid though. And there's few that are and few that aren't. But you know, the thing with all these devices is the algorithms of all the good companies are always being improved through rep detection and machine learning. So all the good companies are always improving. So you might read a review paper from 2016 on some device. Well, that's 4-year-old data, 4-year-old algorithms don't count anymore. So we just got to be aware that, you know, devices, the people who make them, like Jono says, they're smarter. They're always improving their devices. So, you know, we can be aware of that as well. Make it a informed decision about how much money you have and what you're looking at too for a strength coach.
Were you going to add to that, Jono, or was that all right?
Yeah, I think that sums everything up. You know, and I think to echo what Locke and Dan said, you know, we've got to make an informed decision about what we're using it for. You know what I mean? If accuracy is the most essential thing, then we have linear position transducers which have a direct measure of displacement. GymAware, great. You know things like optic lasers, which are in the Flex. You know, measure of displacement, but around 500, 550, maybe 600, somewhere in that mark around there. Great. You know, but the thing is as well, like, you know, you've got these accelerometers. If you want to provide feedback to athletes, and that's something, and you know, you can buy 5 of them for $2,000 or whatever it may be, then away we go. You know what I mean? I think we need to identify what it is from the VBT kind of spectrum of uses, and then go, let's make an informed decision about what we got. Let's work with our own, our own constraints, and then make the best decision.
There's still quite a few questions that we haven't been able to answer just because we've run out of time. Are people all right to reach out to you guys individually, whether it be Twitter or Instagram for you, Dan, to ask any further questions that people have got? Is that all right?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Twitter the best place for you, Jono and Lockie?
Oh, yeah, I do see
Or
Twitter.
Instagram?
Instagram is probably the easiest. Yeah, I'm trying to keep it one place, otherwise you get carried away.
Yeah. So Instagram for you, Lockie. Instagram for you, Dan. Twitter for you, Jono.
Yeah, my Instagram is not popping as much as you boys, so I think it's no. I think Twitter is probably a bit easier for me, and that's how I probably communicate. Instagram's, like I got a lot of my niece, and it's just pictures of me and my niece.
I think Jono's last post was him with his shirt off.
I was going to say that, the topless waiter.
Yeah, with the bunny teeth. Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, I keep those ones pretty locked down. That's my non-ace. No, I think as well, like emails and things like that. And I'm always up for a chat personally as well. And for me, like I try and sit on the coach's floor as much as possible for 4 days a week, and then I try and stay current with the research. So I'm also pretty sharp with the old ACU email. So or a phone call, of course.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you giving up an hour of your Sunday evening to have a chat. And we'll leave it there. But yeah, anyone wants to get in touch with you guys, they're the places to go. Appreciate your time, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, Ron.